Well, let's go ahead and get started. Ron, welcome to our 2023 cohort for Voices of Faith and Leadership. Give him your names, ladies, unless you already have.
We have, but
Okay.
I'm Mary Apple again.
I was about to say Mary, so I got that.
You be safe with those, well, three to say Mary.
Director.
Well, I was about to say, well, it's the rector lady.
Better than me with names. And I'm Mary, I think.
It's too early for Mary.
It's too early for Mary.
And Martha, do you want to introduce yourself?
She's muted. Walking away.
Okay, that's fine.
No, it's one of the, what was it? On the New York Times crossword puzzle. They had a question. What's the most common expression that you use on Zoom?
Unmute.
Unmuted.
And we found ways to do it visually too.
Okay, ready?
Take it away, Ron.
Okay,
Tell us about Buddhism.
so I'd like to say, at first glance, it appears that Buddhism has nothing in common with Abrahamic religions, because that's non-theistic, and thus it feels like an outsider to the interfaith community, because it's not built upon faith, it's built upon experience. As a non-theistic religion, it doesn't rely upon a God that takes a personal interest in the operations of the world. And so it's completely different from the theistic religions. Not only that, as Rabbi Rami Shapiro says, the story of the Buddha carries a challenge that the stories of the other founders of religion don't. They can only be one Abraham, only one Moses, only one Jesus, only one Muhammad, and only one Krishna. Each of these individuals was called by God or was God, so there is no expectation that you can become another Moses or Muhammad or Jesus or Krishna, but you can become a Buddha, at least theoretically. So this distinctive feature of Buddhism is because it's not built upon beliefs, which is known as orthodoxy, but rather is built upon practices, which is known as orthopraxy. And these practices are designed to open a person to the spiritual dimension so they can, experience it themselves rather than put it into a framework that's already there. So in this talk, I will describe my spiritual path. And in the process, I'll show how Buddhism can be considered part of the family religions, along with the theistic religions, despite the fact that it has a very different approach to the topic. So as I point out in the book, there's a lot of similarities in the book. I was brought up with a profoundly atheistic father who never missed the opportunity to hold forth on the failings of Christianity. You talk about the Inquisitions and the Christian opposition to evolution, all the rest of that stuff.
You must have had a really bad experience as a child.
Well, I think a lot of people do with Christianity. I mean, that's one of our big problems today. But we'll get there after the talk. By the time I was in high school, I was a solid atheist myself. Even as a teenager, I was appalled at the massive egotism of Christians who would say, if you don't think like I do, well, you're going right straight to hell. If you had told me at that time that today I would be a member of the Wyoming Interfaith Network and I'd be working hard to enhance religion in Wyoming, I would have asked you, what the heck are you smoking? Well, Christians say God works in strange ways. And as a non-theist, I'm not sure that God is working on me, but I can certify that many strange ways happen to me on my path.
Go ahead. Just want to make sure she can hear us.
Okay.
Yep, looks like it.
It all started out one winter night when I was 16. It was snowing hard with big, fluffy, wet flakes, and it took upon myself to go take a walk in the woods near my house. Because of the snow, there's a milky glow in the sky that allowed me to find my way without a flashlight. At one point, a thought arose in my mind that because every snowflake has a different shape, I was surrounded by an infinite number of differently shaped snowflakes. That sense of infinity suddenly expanded, the snowy forest disappeared, and the world around me seemed to turn itself inside out. I found myself surrounded by a white glowing light. This experience lasted only a moment, but I was convinced that I had experienced something special. Until recently, I never told anybody about it, figuring that they would not believe me, but it completely changed my view of reality. I began a lifelong search for the understanding of the experience. I read the Bible, but it did nothing to satisfy my searching. I read Thoreau and Emerson and was attracted to transcendentalism, but transcendentalism had long since disappeared from American society. Throughout college, I read books on Eastern religions, which were just beginning to be common at that time. Finally, early in my career as an assistant professor at the university, I attended a weekend program on campus that was an introduction to Buddhist meditation. And I was hooked immediately. Here's a religion that was, like science, empirical. It required no previous beliefs. In other words, it relied upon orthopraxy rather than orthodoxy. In Buddhism, you simply sat down, watched your mind, and saw it. Buddhism was founded by this fellow, Gautama Shakyamuni, who was then afterward called the Buddha, who lived someplace between 450 and 550 BC. They don't really know when he lived. And it is said by legend that he was a prince in a little kingdom in sort of northern India near modern Nepal. And he gave up his life as a princeton to meditate and to find the secrets to human suffering. After he received enlightenment, he pondered for many weeks more on how to teach it, and came up with the fourfold truths. This is the basis of all Buddhist traditions, is the fourfold truth. The first truth is life is suffering. Now, this is really, really, what should I say? It looks pretty bleak. But the word for suffering in the language he spoke was dukkha. And some people say that dukkha can be better translated as trying to drive an ox cart with two wheels that are different sizes in a straight line. So, it might better be say life is hard. We all have problems in life. And the second noble truth is this difficulty, the problems we have in life, is partially due to what he called grasping. We have an idea of what we want, and we grasp at it as being, this is the way it has to be. And if it's not that way, then it's very, very annoying and, well, maybe even painful. And the third noble truth is that grasping can be solved, and that will make all the suffering cease. And the fourth noble truth is the path, which is mostly built upon meditation.
The path.
The path.
Path.
Yeah. In other words, meditation, as you sit and meditate, you slowly learn what your mind is doing, and all these little things that you want are simply manufactures in the mind. And when you recognize it, they disappear. So that was a path. And so over the years of my career, as I developed my scientific career, I also developed my Buddhist practice. Whenever it's possible, I attended programs on the esoteric aspects of Tibetan Buddhism and many, many, many retreats where I spent hours and hours and hours in meditation. As part of this process, I became what I call a chauvinistic Buddhist. I was the person who believed that because Buddhism teaches rational practices that help us understand the nature of the spiritual realm, it is superior to other religions where one has to use devotional or supplicational practices to ask a deity to grant you all these insights. In the fall of 2012, I entered the 3-year retreat, which is the ultimate training in Tibetan Buddhism. It was held in Gampo Abbey in Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, where I took temporary ordainment as a monk during the years I was on retreat. This retreat is different than all the other 3-year retreats in the world. And the various Buddha or Tibetan Buddhist groups have a fair number of 3-year retreats around the world. But only in the one that was held on Gampo Abbey were the liturgies all translated into English. So I knew what the heck I was chanting. And it was held over 5 years. 1 year in retreat, 1 year out, 1 year in retreat, 1 year out, another year in retreat. So I finally got out of this whole system in the fall of 2017. The first year of the retreat concentrated on guru yoga. During this time, and this was for 11 hours a day, 7 days a week, we supplicated to the founders of the Tibetan lineage that was hosting the retreat and asked them to help us gain realization. At one point during this, I said to myself, holy mackerel, this is no different than a Christian praying to Jesus Christ. In that year on retreat, I was doing the kind of supplication practice for which I had belittled Christianity and other Abrahamic religions. Up to this point, that supplicational practice in Tibetan Buddhism had not stood out so profoundly to me. We spent the whole second year of the retreat doing deity yoga, visualizing deities that had been lifted from the Hindu pantheon. The only difference was that in Tibetan Buddhism, the deities were not considered external entities. They are part of your mind. In the third year, we spent a lot of yoga practices that were also lifted from Hinduism. By the time the 3-year retreat had ended, I had come to realize that a small number of religious practices were shared among the world's religions. They either rose independently within each religion.
He's just trying to see you a little bit better.
Okay. They either rose independently within each religion or were shared between religions when cultures interacted. This means that when one is comparing religions, one should be comparing the orthopraxy or practices of the religion and not the orthodoxy or the doctrines, which vary greatly. And this insight was more obvious to me after returning to Laramie following my 3rd year of retreat, and Sally Palmer introduced me to the writings of Father Thomas Keating about centering in contemplative prayer. The similarities between contemplative prayer and mindfulness meditation are hidden because a strange thing had taken place during the translation of various religious texts into English. In Hinduism and Buddhism and Sufism, the word contemplation means thinking about something deeply using words. And meditation means sitting quietly without words and letting the meaning arise in your mind. In Christianity, it's exactly the opposite. So, contemplative prayer, when translated into Buddhist parlance, means meditation prayer. And that's exactly what center and contemplative prayer are. I was struck by reading Thomas Keaton's instructions on how the instructions were exactly the instructions I received on doing mindfulness meditation. Initially, when one starts learning mindfulness practice in Buddhism, it's very difficult to keep the mind on track. There's a lot of chattering going on inside. And this is called effortful mindfulness. After some time, the practice settles down and evolves into effortless mindfulness. You can get used to all those chattery things and they just disappear and it just becomes effortless.
How long did that take?
For me? I would say I have just eased into effortless mindfulness in the last 3 or 4 years.
Really?
And that I started meditating in 1983.
Okay.
So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Could I give it another answer to that? Is that both you and I are taught that when your mind goes, like this, when I'm trying to fix coffee, get ready and look beautiful. But we're all both taught to return. You return to your mantra, you return to something that's sacred that brings you back to God. So all of us still struggle. I mean, Ron, when we tell the truth, we didn't say we still struggle, but you learn to come back and not beat up on yourself because your mind.
But the other thing you learn, which is very, very subtle, is you learn that, well, I like to use the example of having a beautiful dream on a beach in Hawaii. You know, you're meditating, right? But you're in Hawaii, the sun is nice and warm, you can hear the seagulls, you can feel the sand between your toes, and then you suddenly say, oh, I'm thinking. And all that disappears like that. So it also happens sometimes when you're sitting there and you're talking about, God, that bitch. She had no right to do that. And then when you realize, oh, it's just empty energy I'm thinking, it disappears. And doing that time and time and time, doing that time and time again makes you realize all these forces that are pushing those thoughts on you, just empty mental energy. And when you do that, then all that effort slowly disappears and you just ease into mindfulness.
They used a lot of this in therapy.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Make sure you speak up, please.
It's
Do they use a lot of these techniques or have adapted from what you're saying into therapy?
absolutely.
Those kids that they were teaching to breathe, that's the
Yeah.
first thing.
That's the first thing.
That's the
Yeah,
first
absolutely. Absolutely. The first thing to realize that there's all this stuff going on in your mind that's just empty energy. You know, Buddhists would say that's just your ego chattering. Well, one of the problems is that ego has a very distinct definition in psychiatry. So I like Thomas Keaton's thing saying that's just your false self. As we grow up in life, growing up is traumatic. There's all sorts of problems in life. And what you do is you develop a persona that's trying to protect that inner side of it that wants pleasure and happiness and stuff like that. So when you sit down to meditate, that's the false self that's popping up and saying, oh, you've got to do this, and you got to do this, and you got to do this. And what you have to learn in meditation, the reason why meditation works, is that slowly you learn that false self is just empty. And when you learn that, then meditation opens you up to a whole spiritual dimension. Anyhow, I realized that Keaton has 2 steps in his contemplative stuff: centering prayer and contemplative prayer. And I realized, oh, wait a minute. Those are, oh, I hope I'm not a stupid guy. There we go. Those are exactly the same as effortful mindfulness and effortless mindfulness. So that, yeah. And me to say, well, there's no difference in the contemplative practices in Christianity and Buddhism, and probably there's no differences in contemplative practices across the religions. They're all trying to see beyond this chattering mind.
And you're calling that, I'm sure I'm understanding, effortful mindfulness and effortless
Right.
mindfulness. And so you're drawing the connection between centering prayer being the effortful
Right.
and contemplative prayer being the effortless
Because he-
mindfulness.
Keaton always says, a lot of times it's just centering prayer. You haven't eased into that contemplative condition,
Mhm.
because that is what I interpret. I mean, since I haven't talked to him, since he's dead, I'd be really, really.
That would be
simple.
hard.
No, but on retreat,
Mhm.
I was able to sit for, well, I sit 3 hours at a shop, and well, I'd get and walk around every hour, but there'd be, maybe 10, 20 minutes when I just concentrating on what I see there. And sometimes thoughts would come up and then they just sort of fade away. So anyhow, oh, I'll wait till Mary.
One thing I've noticed about you over the years,
Sure.
it's just that you're very non-judgmental. And I think that comes from your practice. And so like centering prayer is one way. And what you do is you say, this is the term that one of our contemplatives here in Limerick does not like to use is the monkey mind. But it's used in a lot of the literature because it's just chattering. So I use sometimes the discursive mind. It's like, what do I have to do? Will I be late? All these things that come up, but that's your mind thinking about things.
Well, and I like the term he used, the ego chattering,
Yeah,
how that chattering noise in the background, whether I want it or not.
yeah, it's always there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things for people who are starting to meditate is to learn that's not wrong.
Mm.
That's what's going on.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to settle that down.
I like Thomas Keating's story. I think he says in the beginning of one of his books about the nun who was trying to do this prayer. And she says to her mentor afterwards, well, I swear there was 99 times that I had to come back and try and focus. He goes, that's 99 times you had an opportunity to come back to God. Well, there's a positive way of looking at it.
Well, that you have to look at it positively, because it's going to happen all the time.
Mhm.
And what you're doing is I like to say when you're totally mindful, when that you sort of say, oh, I'm thinking, and you breathe out.
Mm.
There's a perception there that's being perceived, but you are not the perceiver, because you are this little monkey mind that's chattering all the time. And to realize that you are perceiving things that are coming in without you perceiving is a key thing. I mean, both the Buddhist practice in Buddhism, they say that you're recognizing your mind as Dharmakaya. Okay. In Keaton stuff, he'd say you're recognizing the mind of God. And yeah, the closest thing that Buddhism gets to God is Dharmakaya. It's it's the spiritual realm from which everything arises, but it's not a personal thing. Okay. So when I
Different.
when I realized that the contemplative traditions in Christianity is essentially the same as what Buddhists call mindfulness meditation, my transition from chauvinistic Buddhist to a perennial Buddhist was complete. And perennialism, which is often called the perennial philosophy, was first described by Leibniz in the 17th century, and it consists of 4 fundamental points. One is that reality consists of 2 parts. It's the world of things and physical objects and individualized consciousness of humans and animals. And 2, the divine ground from which these things arise. And the second feature is humans can know this divine ground directly through religious practice. And the third thing
Divine
is
ground. I like that.
humans have a split nature. One's the ego, with which we're so familiar. And the other one is the divine nature from which this ego arises. You know, everybody, every religion says we have a divine nature to ourselves. And so our major goal in life is to see through the ego and to identify ourselves with the divine nature. And that's the role of all religious practice. So although perennial philosophy implies that all religions come from similar roots, the similarity is hidden by the fact that the spiritual realm, God if you wish, is beyond concept. The religious experience is real enough, but it takes place in a realm that's outside of our normal experience, and hence outside of our ability to describe it. Consider what would happen if you grew up in a society where everyone was blind. You would have lots of words for tactile experiences, but you have no words for visual experiences. What would happen if you suddenly were granted the ability to see, maybe for only a few moments? You'd see the blue sky, green trees, white clouds, but you cannot describe what you saw to others because our language would have no concept of color, sky, or cloud. Right? So all this, these experiences of mystical experiences and such are beyond words, are beyond concepts. And since God is part of it, it's also beyond concepts. So every religion uses its own symbols to describe that experience and have its own practices to gain access to it. And each religion can show that people who participate in their practices can gain insights into the divine. The problem with this orthodoxy is not that it doesn't work, but it becomes too easy for those who practice a particular orthodoxy to assume that theirs is the only one that works and that all the other ones are simply wrong. The other ones everybody else is going to hell. Unlike theistic religions, Buddhism doesn't fit the divine realm into an orthodox framework. Instead, Buddhism emphasizes orthopraxy and lets the participants experience the divine on their own. As a result, people can engage in Buddhist practice and believe whatever they wish. This is why masters in monotheistic religions, such as Father Thomas Keating and Rabbi Rami Shapiro, have used their engagement in Buddhist practice to enhance their writings for their own religions. So one way to make clear the problem of interfaith dialogue in the world's religion is to consider the old Zen statement. When the wise man points at the moon, all the fool sees is the fingers. So each religion represents a finger pointing at the moon. Those who argue that their religion is the best simply are talking about the finger and not about the moon to which the finger points. When each faith can admit that their religion is simply a finger pointing at the moon, then other religions also point at the same moon, then interfaith dialogue becomes possible. When I realized that the finger I was following was pointing at the same moon as the fingers of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism, I felt it was time for me to start interacting with people from other religions who are contemplative to help enhance individual faiths in Wyoming. This is one reason why I joined the Wyoming Interfaith Network. Of course, the people in WIN, being interested in interfaith discussions, were humble enough to realize that their own religion was simply a finger pointing at the moon. And they totally accepted me as a non-theistic person in the group of people who practice theistic religions.
Yay, thank you.
To welcome some of what you said there. One of my recent chaplain students, his description of himself, he's mid-30s or so, is a Scandinavian Lutheran Buddhist. You know, recognizing that he grew up in that Scandinavian Lutheran culture and that formed him a lot, but also that he was Buddhist and following those practices, and that this was his way of recognizing the spiritual realm in himself and around him and stuff. And he had a real ability to combine the two to bring spiritual healing to his patients and stuff. That was really a gift, and a gift to his class and me too, to bring those Buddhist sayings and prayers in, and draw the connections for us.
Well, I think after listening to Trina last night or yesterday, because their faith comes out of the Sufis, you know, they're Hezbollah or whatever.
That impronounceable name.
Yes.
But anyhow.
But so there are some similarities in some ways with what the Baha'i are doing as well, and you know, all different.
The only
Is
break
that
I have with
correct?
Baha'i is that they don't understand Buddhism.
They what?
They don't understand. They put Buddhism in the same category as all the Abrahamic religions. And it's not an Abrahamic religion.
Yes.
Baha'i is an Abrahamic religion.
Gotcha.
But I like Baha'ism because it basically is saying the same sort of thing, that every faith has value,
Yes.
and you use your faith to make your progress. Yeah.
And we all pray to the same God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or the same thing that might be considered as God.
Yes. Exactly. No, that's very interesting. That's very interesting.
So I think Mary had sent you a question, and since we're talking about racism in the group.
Oh, I
this
did.
weekend.
Yeah, I put one answer to it.
Okay, and would you like to share that, and maybe we can
Yeah, I
talk
mean,
about that a little bit?
basically,
What was the question?
It was about how would Buddhists view racism and
racial
racial,
justice.
yeah,
of course, Buddhism
for Buddhists.
was on the opposite side of Christianity. In other words,
Mhm.
being a religion in a occupied country, the Christians looked down upon it because it was,
Not Christian.
inferior to them.
Mhm.
But the one thing I tell people that you have to visualize, it's not quite the same as that fourth thing in perennialism, but it's very close. It's in perennialism, the major goal in a person's life is to learn to see through the ego and to identify with your divine nature. I like to tell people the main goal in life is to learn that you are not your body. The thing that makes you you is that aspect of your person, essentially the divine nature of your nature. Yeah. And when your body dies, the divine nature continues. Okay, so if you are not your body, And all the people that you're interacting with are not their bodies. And the color of skin makes no sense. Because you're talking about the divinity that lies beyond it. Yeah.
Yeah, you did send me a
Yeah.
thing on Buddhism and racism and stuff like
Right.
that, but you've already answered that, so that's good.
No, because the racism looks really stupid when you realize that everybody, divine nature is beyond their body, beyond the color of the skin.
So you say we're just on one. Okay, can you repeat to me what you said about being, that we really aren't our body, our mind? So,
You're a divine spirit that's inhabiting this body.
yeah,
And when this body dies, that divine spirit goes on. And
And-
where it goes, I couldn't tell you, because that's a topic of many religions. Buddhism and Hinduism say, oh, you come back. And you keep on coming back until you realize that well, you keep on coming back until you realize that you are your mind. And then you don't have to come back again.
But then where do you go?
To me, it sounds an awful lot like heaven.
Exactly.
well, I guess my question kind of comes, it's, my mother passed away about a year and a half ago. But she often comes up, or something happens and she's there again. Still teaching us stuff. Or people say, this is the moment I hit. And so do you feel like they stick around, or do you?
Well, I've done a lot of hospice work, and there's been several instances that just sort of make you pause.
Indeed.
I was on the 12th hour group for a while, which essentially comes after the person has died, gets things ready for the and the mortuary, and takes care of all those things. I went to one which was south of town. And it was the person, they had put the person, bed in the living room so they can look out at the mountains. And his daughter said that she went to get some pills for him, and she grind them up and put them in a solution. In that little bit of time, he died. And when she came back, oh, it's very common. When she came back, she looked out the window, and there was the biggest antelope herd she'd ever seen.
Wow.
You could, if those came to take them away. Yeah, exactly.
Like an antelope.
If the materialists who say, oh, the antelopes were just sitting there. So, yeah, so if you're sensitive enough to that, you see that. I mean, one of the reasons why I keep on doing hospice work is this. It opens you up to this fact that the dividing line between life and death.
Seminal space.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's not a solid line. Yeah.
I worked for hospice for 12
Yeah.
years. I've seen people who I can't see them, but they're talking to angels and to their former family members
Absolutely.
who died. It's just
The first patient I encountered, it was December, and I was busy correcting tests. I had a lot to do. And hospice called and said, we got this patient over at the nursing home who's very, very uncomfortable and needs to have a visitor. And I said, oh, okay. So I figured, okay, yep, I'm doing this for him. And I went in and came in and put my hand on his shoulder and said, well, how are you doing, John? I don't even remember what his name is. He says, I'm doing fine since they started coming. I said, who are they? And he said, I don't know, but you're not one of them. I said, how so? He says, I can feel your hand on my shoulder. And he spent an hour telling me about the people that were visiting him.
Do you mind sharing what he was seeing and hearing?
You know, most of that was 12 years ago, 13 years ago. Most of that I've forgotten, unfortunately. But, you know, it was really stunning.
Where was it a good experience for him? These
Yes,
people
it's-
were greeting him and welcoming
It's
him.
definitely calming him down. They were speaking a strange language that he didn't know, but he understood anyhow.
Sweet.
Anyhow, you know, when I got back in the car after, I said, well, that wasn't a gift to him, it's a gift to me. And so I stay in hospice.
That happens a lot in hospice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tell people, you know, Laramie has developed a really nice hospice house. And one of the places I really like to go in Laramie is the hospice house because it's so cheerful.
Huh.
Um,
That's neat.
you know, they've got just the great kind of help that, you know, keeps it, you know, ebullient. But yeah, so we don't know.
You did a lot of yoga in your
Yeah.
retreats and in your experiences and stuff. In fundamentalist Christianity, there's a big pushback against yoga
There's a big pushback against contemplative prayer.
and contemplative. Okay, yeah. I was asking specifically about yoga. Maybe you can explain a little bit. Traditional yoga uses the images of the chakras and this, and one of those images is a snake or something like that.
Kundalini, yeah.
There's other images and stuff that maybe you can tell us more about, but because of the image of the snake, then it's evil. Never mind that I really like the bull snakes around my place because they eat the darn mice.
Yeah, I mean,
Speak
you know,
a little bit to that.
in Kundalini and in a lot of the practice we were doing was to bring the heat up,
Okay.
you know, from the core here up through the chakras.
And then, of course, with traditional Christianity, controlling and putting down the heat, so
Yeah.
to speak, would be important. So that's one thing they would be pushing back against.
But you have to learn that and I must say I was just terrible at this for months and months and months. But you have to, you know, it basically was designed to teach you how to control the temperature in your body, in all your digestive systems. And I spent a couple of weeks learning how to die, how to expel my consciousness to the top of my head the moment I did. Which I was not successful because I'm still here.
I do it when I see the dentist.
You try to take yourself outside of your
Yes,
body. So
yes.
Exactly.
I just take a nap when I go to the dentist. But anyway, so the yoga and
But
Yeah.
yeah, and I like if this happened the first time I looked at websites where I said contemplative prayer. And that was maybe 5 years ago. It may have changed, but at that time, most of the entries there were against it. Because, well, if you let thoughts come to you, if you let these things arise, how do you know that's not the devil? You've got to control your mind. Otherwise, you can go and follow the devil. So basically, contemplative prayer is a practice of the devil.
Sadly, that has been my experience with people from a certain mindset.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's-
and they'll quote things like some of the Old Testament. It says, "Bring every thought of the mind under control." The heart is deceitful above all things. But then there's also scriptures that say the heart is the best part of you.
Yeah, right.
I was like,
Well,
yeah.
the Keaton, see if I can quote this right. One of the quotes of Jesus, that when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and do it in private. That is contemplative prayer. But fundamentalism is about control.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, if you work in hospice, you know full well you don't have any control anything.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the, might be even called a tenet of fundamentalist. We have to control everything because to give God complete control, instead of recognizing that we can't control everything, and especially, and sometimes not much at all. And that's how we give control to
Right,
God.
and not only that, your consciousness is based on the mind of God.
Yeah.
So if you can get in and understand your consciousness, you can start to understand the mind of God.
One of the
When
tenets.
the doctor was talking to us last night, he was talking about the things that have happened and how it's evolved. And I was thinking of what's her name, who did the Baha'i? What's her name?
Katrina.
When she was talking about integration and disintegration, which is all over the world. It's us, it's all of nature.
Mhm. These concepts transcend any one religion. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun? Yeah.
One of the points I try to make in my book, I may not have made it as solid as I could, is that fundamentalism is a product of materialism.
As a product of what?
Which is really
Materialism.
funny.
Materialism.
In other words,
Yeah.
fundamentalism didn't arise until after a lot of the scientific revolution began. If you say, okay, real advance in science began about the 1600s, and fundamentalism arrived about the 1800s. And what the fundamentalists were saying is that everything in the Bible is solid facts. God put them there. That's materialism.
Translated 47 times. But
Yeah, with all sorts of nuances that were important, gone.
Yeah.
But so the point is that part of the product of our materialist society are religions that are empty of spiritual values.
Capitalism.
Yeah, capitalism is it, right?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now is the fact that capitalism, there's no thing that can grow continuously. That's what cancer is known as. And capitalism eventually runs up against its borders. The idea that now is sometimes defined as sustainability, but sustainability also involves values. Capitalism has no values. If it's not money,
It's just money.
yeah. So the values, the spiritual values that we enhance our society are missing. I mean, one of the points I make in the last chapter is that the future of our society is going to be based upon a resurgence of spirituality. And the problem is, of course, the fundamentalist churches are going to hate it.
Because it won't fit their prescribed. You must believe this, you must act like this, you must look like this.
Exactly. All that's very, very, very materialistic, right? That's very
Yeah.
solid.
Yeah.
I like to say it's ossified.
That would be a good word for it.
Yeah.
That would be a good word for it.
And so that's another reason why I joined WIN. Said, okay, I have something I can contribute to Christianity. And that's what that note I sent you was all about.
Mhm.
I don't know if we'll get time to get together after. I hope to get back by lunch.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll call up my contractor and see if he can zoom in and put the toilet in my house, make me happy.
We do like indoor plumbing.
We have a few minutes. I'm wondering, so on symbolism, Katrina talked about the symbol that they have for Baha'i.
Mhm.
Can you talk about the symbols that reflect
Well,
Buddhism? And we
one
have
big
the symbol
symbol is a lotus.
the lotus.
Okay, and it's a beautiful flower that grows out of mud.
Appropriate.
So, your thoughts, your mind, everything is a beautiful process that's grown out of the mud of all your experiences.
I'm gonna look up a picture while you're talking. Keep talking. I am listening.
And what about the wheel? Because isn't that often
Yeah,
used as
it's a
symbol?
wheel. It's interesting. Because the wheel of Dharma, which of course is a Buddhist symbol, is in the flag of India. So
Well, it comes in different colors, but there's, you probably are familiar with it.
mud comes in different colors too.
Well, we have red dirt in it.
Yeah. But that's the wheel of Dharma, or the wheel of samsara, and the fact that it talks about the processes whereby essentially thoughts arise, concepts begin, grasping begins, and then eventually get rebirth again. So those things, the symbolism there, which I didn't bother to memorize at the moment, is essentially the symbolism of the wheel of life, and how, if until you recognize how you are producing all your problems, you go around and around the circle of life.
Thank you.
Could you just say those 4 or 5 things again, like thoughts?
Well, there's 12 of them.
Oh, well, yeah.
But eventually, it goes from thoughts to grasp into actions, and then to eventually to rebirth. So you're born, and you undergo rebirth eventually, because you keep on believing your thoughts and acting in ways that are not, there's no sin in Buddhism. There's skillful as opposed to unskillful actions. So unskillful actions hurt people. Skillful actions allow you to solve problems without hurting people.
So the notion of the wheel then is that you just keep
Going
turning
around
around
and
and
around
your ideas to liberate yourself
from that.
from that, and the way to do that is to give
I mean,
conscious.
what I think is very interesting is you could argue that the Judeo-Christian view of hell, purgatory, and heaven is exactly the same as the Buddhist view, but with very different symbolisms, right? In other words, your whole idea of your rebirth system is to get to the point where you feel like you're pure mind and you don't need a body, and you can dissolve into the whole environment of pure mind. That could be called heaven. Now, Buddhists say that, one of the nice things about Buddhism is you don't have to die to go to hell.
There's such things as nothing happens.
Well, the
Think
thing
about it.
about Mr. Trump,
Worst things that.
he's a very pathetic person.
Oh, Ron, don't get me started on that.
Okay.
Yes,
We want to keep, yeah.
unfortunately, our time is up.
Yeah.
I thank you for you.
Oh,
Thank you for your time, your wisdom, sharing with us, your willingness to join WIN and become a part of this and make Christians better.
Well, I'm just saying, all you have to do is add contemplative practices to Christianity, and they open up.
Yes.
It opens up. I mean, that's the whole idea of my letter to you is that, hey, we're gonna see a spiritual regeneration. Unfortunately, it may be long after we're dead,
Yes, unfortunately,
but there's no
yeah.
reason why we can't try doing it now.
Right.
Adding contemplative practices to.
Well, we need to start now, otherwise just be put off even longer.
Exactly, that's my point.